Welcome back to Live With, brought to you by Species Nutrition. Visit speciesnutrition.com. I'm Dave Palumbo, and today's guest is a very good friend of mine from back in the 90s. We've known each other for many years. You guys probably know him as one of the top 212 IFBB pros of his era. The guy I'm talking about, Jason Arntz. Look at you with the beard.
Hello. Yeah, I had to grow it in for the winter up here.
I know.
I'm not as privileged as the people out in Florida, so I gotta adapt to my environment.
Yeah. Jason, you were always like Mr. Clean Cut, pretty boy look. Now you got this like ruffly beard with the gray hairs in it, showing your age,
Well, the more I started losing on top, I thought I should grow more on the bottom to kind of compensate. And it gives you a false sense of security that even though you're aging, it looks like you're still growing hair.
Oh, is that what it is? You always had a good head of hair, though. I didn't think you'd ever lose it.
Yeah, you know what? I was fortunate. I as well as I do. I knew guys in their 20s, especially coming from the industry we came from.
Yeah.
Guys were losing it early, but I held on to mine until I was almost 40, and then it started thinning and getting a little spotty in different areas.
You got to go.
But I had a good life with it.
You got to go for the hair tattooing like I had done.
Yeah, right.
It works.
When I make my first million.
It works. Let's talk a little bit about, first of all, you have a new supplement company out we're going to talk about in a little bit, but I want to go back because a lot of guys like to hear about the old days. And, you and I knew each other from the 90s. We kind of, we did a lot of, stuff together back in the day, from bumping into each other in Gold's Gym Venice, seeing each other at all the shows because we were doing all the same shows together, USA Nationals, Junior Nationals, shows like that. Talk to me a little bit about what the atmosphere of the 90s was like training, because you started in Diamond Gym, which was probably one of the hardest hardcore gyms back in the 90s when John Kemper owned it. Talk to us a little bit about that first.
Okay, so when I started at an early age, and I was an athlete growing up with football and wrestling, and I kind of adapted and moved into bodybuilding. But that was Diamond Gym was at that time, that was the place to be, and you could kind of it's like that was the version of Bev's Gym now, back in the 90s, early 2000s. If you wanted to be a bodybuilder and you wanted to make it in the industry or make it in the sport, that's where all the good people trained. John Kemper was the owner, like you said, and he was an NPC judge and an IFBB judge. So, you would get good critique, good criticism there, and you didn't have cheerleaders. I think the difference between now and then is there was less cheerleaders back then than there are nowadays, and I was always against that. I was always, give me honest feedback, give me good constructive criticism, because without that, how do you get better? How do you move forward? But yeah, it was a hardcore gym. You didn't go there unless you meant business or you were looking to do something. And that's kind of, it builds your work ethic, and it builds your training ethic, and you learn a lot about the industry and about dieting and about training there. And it was, it was a main part of my career. It was a huge part of my career for all of my amateur career and most of my pro career.
It was a rough gym too. There were some tough guys in that gym, right? There were fights and stuff like that. It wasn't in a nice part of town. I had a few of them. Right?
Yeah. I ran the gym for 11 years. I started working there when I was 19 years old, and I worked there for 11 years. And it was half the clientele were criminals, and the other half were cops. And we kind of coexisted. And when I took over the gym, John primarily had it as a place just for people to train at, but then it started developing into a business.
Right.
So when I took it over, I kind of saw the business aspect of it, and him and I worked well together, and I helped turn it into a profitable business. And during that transition, that's where a lot of the problems, arose, because you have guys that would come in that weren't used to signing. And we used to sign in back then. Now everybody's scanned in. But, guys that never used to sign in or pay their memberships or pay for drinks or pay for supplements. And here you have some 19-year-old, white kid from the suburbs, trying to dictate and put a little authority in the place. So there was, there was some bumping of the heads and some things that needed to be set in place for the place to move forward, in a business way. And that's what I did. I kind of cleaned it up and, helped bring it to what it is today.
Now John also was, the great thing about John was he was a competitor too. So he trained, he competed back in the day. He was a really good bodybuilder too. A lot of people didn't realize that. So not only did he have a gym, not only was he a judge, but he actually understood the mindset of a bodybuilder.
Well, he was around, yeah, exactly. He was around it. He was a pioneer. So he kind of, his mannerisms and his way of life kind of, dictated if you wanted to be a bodybuilder, that's what you had to do. So it was ideal for somebody like me to develop in that environment because it was somebody I could learn from and put my little twist on things and make little changes here or there. But it was a good formula, of success for me to start early in my career there.
I remember when you first started competing. I mean, I think it was around the same time I started doing, the junior nationals and stuff like that. And you were winning class at shows, and you were placing really high at nationals. Was that a really validating type moment for you? Because I mean, you were placing during an era when it was only bodybuilding, and the greatest bodybuilders probably in the history of our sport really were competing then. Yeah,
I agree, and. I started off young, and I guess people saw I showed some promise, and I started doing well. And it's a little different. There's I'd hate to say this, but there was less entitlement, I would say, back then. Where nowadays, people are competing, and after one or two shows, they're already talking about earning their pro cards. And for us, it was different because you were just happy to be called in the top 5 because the classes were so big and so overwhelming with good physiques, like good, well-balanced physiques and guys that it was just a different era, and I remember my first nationals. I was like, shit, I'm hoping to crack the top 15. You're back there with these guys, and I actually placed fourth at my first nationals, so that was very validating.
What year was that, Jason, again?
My first nationals was 95. You and I did the junior nationals together in 94. You won the heavyweights. I took second in the light heavyweights. And, from then I pushed forward. And no, I'm sorry, that was 95. And then I did the nationals that year and took fourth.
Right. That was your Don Long one, right?
Don Long won that year, yes. And, placing fourth in my first nationals with that lineup and the caliber of guys that were competing, it kind of fueled you for the next year, and that's what drove me. And being able to place that high at such a huge show at an early age, showed me that hey, I could do something in this sport.
You did something that really kind of broke the mold in a sense, because when guys had a weight class that they established themselves in, they stuck to that weight class until they got their pro card back then. And you kind of were at the top of that light heavy. Well, you weren't at the top when you first started. You were in the light heavyweight class. You were doing very well, placing top 5, which was at that time that you were in the elite group if you were in the top 5. And you actually left the division for the heavyweights, which is something that no one ever would do. It was like a line that people just didn't cross.
Right. So in 1998, that was the first year they added the super heavyweight class.
Right.
To the lineup. And they cut off the heavyweights at 225. For the last nationals, I had won the USA in 97, and I went to the nationals that year, and I placed third, I believe.
Let me stop you for a second, because people don't realize just winning your class at the USA didn't get you a pro card back then. You had to win the overall back then. That's why.
Actually, you're right. I won the USA twice. I won it as a light heavyweight in 97, and I won it as a heavyweight in 98, and I didn't get my pro card in any of them. I lost the overall by 1 point the first year as a light heavy and 2 points the second year. But,
that sucks,
leave that as it may. So I was always, the last year and a half, 2 years, I was sucking down. I was having trouble making the class.
Right.
And I just felt like, there were some guys that I thought I'd get a better shake, moving up to the heavyweight class. Because I knew the bigger guys at that time. It was Dennis, and he moved up. He won the super heavyweights that year at the USA. So I moved up to heavyweight. Dennis James, yes. And Melvin Anthony was there. Like, you had some good quality guys, but they were all moving up. So I thought, you know what, let me try this. I could always suck back down if I don't make it for the Nationals. But I went my first USA as a heavyweight, and I won. I won the heavyweight class and missed the overall by 2 points. But that was the same year I kept the weight class, went to the Nationals, and got my pro card, winning the heavyweights and the overall. And then that was against Orville Burke, and that was Kevin English was in the lineup. He was down. He was a middleweight at that time, you know, and it was quite a lineup. There was some real respectable athletes, you know, at that time.
But you were always the kind of guy that when you stepped on stage, you were the most conditioned guy on stage. You know, you always made sure that you were flawless in the presentation, in conditioning. And so you beat guys that were better than you a lot of times or that might have structurally been better than you because of the level of conditioning that you brought to the stage and the professionalism that you brought to the stage. Do you think that is a lost art nowadays?
Absolutely. And then you hit the nail on the head. So, you know, all we have is the work we put into this, you know, and I knew there was a couple guys, you know, from a structure point of view and a shape point of view that I just probably wouldn't beat, you know, and I knew there was a couple guys that, you know, who knows, politically they might have had an edge over me, or they were around longer, maybe paid their dues a little bit longer than me. So you always factor that in. But the only thing we could ever count on, the only thing we could really ever control is our work ethic and what we put into preparing for a competition. So I always knew, like, I have to out-prepare everybody. I have to out-train everybody. I have to out-diet everybody. I have to be more conditioned than anybody. And I wanted to learn about the body and dieting and supplementation and the other supplementations that we use for that. You know, that was always important because there was a lot of guys that just did what their trainers told them, and they didn't really know the why of things. And for me, it always made sense to know the why of things, because if you hit a wall, at least you know where to make a change. You know, you know where you have to adjust, as opposed to other people. They hit a wall and they don't know what to do. You know, so that's the only thing I had going for me is the fact that I had great work ethic, and I could. You know, I could do it all with a smile on my face. Nothing ever bothered me. I could diet for, you know, all year and, you know, do the training, and I enjoyed it. You know, I wish I enjoyed it more later on in my pro career, when it actually became like, you know, when you get to the Olympia level, you're just fighting for it. But my last 2 years, I was like, I want to sit back and enjoy this, because you let those times go by you and then they're all gone. But yeah, you're right. So nowadays it just seems as if, you know, everybody's on their phones and everybody's, you know, social mediaing it up and, you know, doing their thing. You know, we didn't have phones back then. And even when we did, even when we did later on in our careers, they were in the locker where they belong, you know, and you're focused on your training. And look, if you could get through a training session with me at that time, and you trained just as hard as I did, so I know it. You know, if you could get through a training session with me and make a call while you're doing that, then you're a better man than I am, because, you know, it was grueling. It was hard work. It was no air conditioning in the gyms. It was, you know, it was hardcore.
You didn't want to take a picture. Maybe someone else had a phone they could take a picture of you, but you weren't carrying your phone and taking a picture. You were too worried about the next set. I mean, we would sit around your house. I remember we would sit around for hours and we would talk about bodybuilding and who's good and who's not, and all the whatever gossip we can possibly get, because there really was no internet. And we would talk about drugs, and we would talk about how they work and the right dosages. But even with all the, you know, the back and forth and what we talked about and all the, you know, craziness we did you ever in your wildest dreams ever fathom the dosages that you'd see people taking nowadays? It seemed like back when we competed, there was a standard, this is how you do it. No one went beyond that, because you just didn't do that. You did it this way, and then everything else was basically food and training related if you wanted to make improvements.
That was it, you know, because there's only so much your body can absorb. There's only so much, you know, the rest it either goes stagnant or it gets converted, you know, so you're only going to utilize a certain amount of certain substances that you're taking. So just like you know, we always wanted to learn the best way to take this, the most efficient, the most effective way to take something, and we applied that. Nowadays, I think the work ethic and the training, you know, training formulas or training plateaus have been diminished, and it's more of, well, why don't I just take more of this to compensate for what I'm not doing over here?
I mean, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. Give me your typical off-season cycle back in the day.
Okay, so there were certain things I just did not want to use in the off season, because I wanted to, you know, not that I wanted to be special, but I wanted my body to react to them a certain way pre-contest, and that was the most important thing for me. So your DHTs, like your Primobolins, your Winstrol's, your Masterones, that would be saved for contest time.
Right.
You know, off season, that's when you're using your DECAs, your 19-ord testosterones, your DHT, you know, heavier DHTs like an Anadrol, and, you know, some sort of either a test blend or a straight test, you know, but dosages, you know, at that time, I think 1,500 mgs was high. You know, that was a high dose. And even, I mean, DECA, I think 400 mgs a week, maybe. I mean, it was EQ was 50 mgs every other day,
right,
you know, 3 times a week. Now guys are doing, you know, 200 mgs per shot almost every day. You know, it doesn't make sense to me. You know, I guess it makes sense to them now. I don't know why, but you know, Anadrol 1 a day. I know guys that were taking 2 or 3 of them a day. You know, and you know, at the time, growth hormone wasn't as prominent as it was. It started building up. But, you know, that was kind of used primarily pre-competition. You know, some guys started, you know, using it in the off season, but, you know, 3-4 IUs, you know, a day. And insulin wasn't big back then. It kind of started coming towards the end of our careers. I was never really big on insulin. I did like it, and I used it a little bit in the off season, but it was primarily I would use it intra-workout, just to shuttle the nutrients into the cells, you know, while I'm training. And that was the one time where your body really isn't your pancreas really isn't supposed to be producing insulin while you're training. So I thought it wouldn't offset any type of workload on your pancreas, so you'd have less of a chance to shut it down. Nowadays, guys are using it during meals, and their pancreases aren't utilized. They don't get used, so they're going to shut down and, you know, become diabetics. You know, and I've heard of stories like that. I've seen stories like that, and it's sad.
I think with the amount of GH people using it, it's probably a good idea to use insulin nowadays because I think they're overworking their pancreas. So sometimes giving their pancreas a break might not be a bad idea. It was a different mindset back then because I don't think anyone, like you said, used more than 3 or 4 IUs of GH. And most people couldn't even afford to use that. They were using 200 milligrams. And you know, there were guys, probably a lot of them at Diamond Gym, that probably were using like 1 shot of test a week and like a couple of Winstrol injections a week, and they were getting ready for the Nationals. And these guys all looked great, right? I mean, you know those guys, they didn't have the money to use all these drugs.
Well, I remember top pros, and I don't want to mention names or call anybody out on the show, but guys that I had spoken to that would barely do anything in the off season. They would save it all for pre-contest. You know, but those are guys that had, you know, they were the smaller of the pros at the time, but weren't looking to get bigger, distort their physiques. And that was the thing also, is I think, you know, the physiques were different then, and now they've kind of morphed into something that, you know, it's a little unrecognizable, and I don't know if it's even, I noticed in the past couple of years, you know, with Sean Roden winning the Olympia, you know, he's a smaller version, it looks like the way they're going is more of the classic look, which is, you know, I have to agree. You know, I do like that, you know, and back then you had guys with smaller waists and better structures, and, you know, and now there's a lot of these guys that just look like they take a lot of shit, diet, and get on stage. Unfortunately,
that's it. Now, you know, every era has its, you know, vice, so to speak. And I think back when we competed, you know, in the 90s, obviously Dan Duchesne had introduced Nubane to the bodybuilding world, and a lot of bodybuilders got involved with it. I know you and I were using it. We both have talked about it back in the day. How do you think? Where did Nubane come from? Did that come from Craig Titus, or did it come from Dan Duchesne?
Well, I think the statute of limitations has run out on that, so I feel free that I could divulge. So I know at one given time, probably in the later 90s, that anyone who got Nubane in the country, probably most likely it came from me. So there was a good possibility. But I think it did all start actually in California. I remember Craig was big on it, and I actually, in '95, some of the covers I just recently put up on Instagram with myself and Amy Fadley. I remember during that photo shoot, we were doing some pictures in the water, and I was holding her, and I didn't realize it at the time, but my feet were buried in the sand underwater. And I must have twisted or tweaked it the wrong way. And later on that night, I started getting pain in one of my ankles, and my ankle swelled up. So I went to one of those Medi clinics to see what was wrong with it, make sure there was no breaks or sprains. And the guy prescribed me Nubane.
Wow, really?
As if I was just going in to buy candy at the store. Maybe you thought because I was a bodybuilder, that's what I wanted, but I didn't. And, I wasn't a drug user, a recreational drug user, and it wasn't my thing. So I had the prescription for it. I never used it. And I came back to New Jersey, and all of a sudden, one of the guys that I used to do business with pulls out a box and has it. Yeah. So I knew some guys that wanted it, and one day, I don't know what it was, but I tried it. And I would use it just for training purposes, but it's an opioid, so, and it's a bad opioid. It's not a strong opioid, but what it does do is it bonds to 4 of the opioid receptor sites. So it makes it a lot harder to get off than some of your common prescription opioids.
Sure.
So you build up a dependency to it. So I had taken it for a while, and I stopped, and it was difficult to stop. But it was part of my life when I was done with it, and I just wanted to get rid of it.
Unfortunately, a lot of people, I got to say I have the same story similar to you. Obviously, you used it for a bunch of years and then stopped it, but a lot of guys transitioned to other things after that, unfortunately.
Right.
And we saw a lot of guys go down bad pathways, and we see a lot of drug abuse in our sport. One of the people that obviously, I don't think he started with New Bane, but Paul DeMeo went from Percocets to heroin, and obviously eventually OD'd on that. Bodybuilding for me, and I know for you probably, was never a sport of like trying to get high. It was always like, about how I could be a better bodybuilder. And sometimes you rationalize using certain compounds. Why do you think it is that some guys get addicted to drugs and lose track of their bodybuilding goals and become more into the whole drug, scene?
Well, it's believe it or not to simplify it, but I think it's basically simple, is they're drug addicts. There's guys, just like you said, I never did drugs except for bodybuilding purposes. If it wasn't going to benefit me in the sport or help my career, I had nothing to do with it. There's other guys that I knew that, they had issues before, alcohol issues or cocaine issues, or there was always some sort of substance, that they would utilize to help them ease some kind of a pain. And that just transitioned to New Bane or some other sort of opioid. And the problem is some people, they never get rid of those demons. And like I said, I was always a why kind of guy. So I always wanted to know why I was doing something, or why this bothers me, or why this affects me, so I could fix it, and knock on wood, I don't have any hangups. I don't have any I have normal psychological issues, but nothing, no dependency issues, self-sufficient, and unfortunately, there's a lot of people that don't walk that same path. They have demons, and they have things in their past that they haven't gotten through. And look, bodybuilding is at that time anyway, it's more of a loner sport. So you kind of had to have some issues going into it. And then you introduce then you start introducing drugs into that. And in the late 90s, there was a time, Dave, that bodybuilding made a turn. And that's when ecstasy became popular, and it just turned into a party scene. And that was never it for me. I never saw the percentage in that, and I really didn't want to have any part of it. And, I had gotten mixed up with a couple things but for short durations of time, but it wasn't me, and it was easy to walk away from. But, a lot of the people that I was around, kind of fell victims to that. And, look at the Kelly Ryan and Craig Titus incident. It's, and guys like Paul DeMeo, but that was a dark time in the sport.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people did get sort of sucked into that subculture maybe, and I think, like you said, a lot of people were basically easing their pain with these drugs. Now, and you and I have talked, and I don't know if you want to discuss it all, but you didn't have the greatest upbringing either, as far as with the relationship with parents and stuff like that. You could have easily have used that as an excuse to take drugs. I mean, right?
Yeah, look, I grew up with an alcoholic father and a very abusive environment, physically, mentally, emotionally, and a mother that, I love them, but they're enablers. She's an enabler, and she wasn't part of the solution. She was more part of the problem. I've kind of reconciled with my parents. There was a long stretch of time that I didn't have a relationship with them. But, even the dysfunction, there's two kinds of people. There's people that either repeat the patterns or there's people that go a different way. And I saw at an early age what was going on in my house, and I knew it was wrong, and I didn't want a part of it, and I couldn't wait to get out.
Right.
My brother and sister, are still, kind of victims to this a little bit, and are still, sucked into the, the vacuum of it, or, but I was able to get away and kind of, go, and look, I had my issues with other things,
Sure.
legal issues and stuff like that. But
Right.
from an abusive point of view or a self-defeating point of view, I had no part of that.
Now, when when we go back and we look back at the people we hung out with, and I'm glad to say that you and I are sitting here in the year 2019 and talking to each other in good health and with families and kids, because that means we did good, right? But there are people that we grew up with. What?
We did good. I had an echocardiogram a year ago, and it scared the shit out of me waiting for the results. And I actually have a perfect heart. I was expecting some kind of enlargement or something, but knock on wood, yeah, we did it right. But I think that goes to say that, you and I both, I think we were ahead of our time, because we knew what we were doing.
Yeah.
And, we knew there was chances we had to take, but we took the path with the least resistance and the safest route. We always knew there was going to be side effects, there was going to be consequences, but, if you could get rid of the real bad ones, the unnecessary ones, and stick to the ones that, you kind of had to do, knock on wood, yeah, we made the best of it.
Well, and we got out, I think, before we pushed our luck, so to speak. I knew at some point I had to downsize and I had to get away from that, because that's not going to be good for longevity. And, you know, some people never know when to get out. And unfortunately, they get sucked into that whole culture. Now, I mean, we grew up, I think we have to bring him up because, we were both pretty good friends with him at one point. You probably even better than me, Matt Duvall. I mean, we saw him come up together. You guys were living together at one point. And to see him, pass at such a young age, I mean, how did that affect you?
I mean, that was... I got a phone call that one day and from a mutual friend, and he said, Matt's dead. And it almost didn't register. He had moved back to Virginia, and his family was pursuing a wrestling career.
Yeah.
And I really don't know all the full details of his death. And, we could all jump to conclusions, but I think we all assume, basically the same thing. But Matt, Matt was, he was a good guy. And, he was my roommate and he was my training partner for a long time, and we went through a lot of stuff together, and we were part of each other's lives for, crucial parts of our lives, and to see that happen. And look, I have 5 or 6 people that I've lost that have all fell victims to drugs or abuse or bad behavior. It's just bad behavior. But he was a good guy. He had his issues too.
Everyone had his.
He had things that I didn't agree with, but people had things that they didn't agree with me. But that's what makes us human.
Sure.
But Matt was a good guy.
He just but I think that I think he got sucked into that vacuum, like you said, of like non-escape. I think a lot of us escaped, but a lot of us didn't escape, and the people who got sucked into that bodybuilding vacuum are the ones that seem to be succumbing to early deaths. And we see a lot of that from the 90s bodybuilders. That's what scares me about today's generation, because they're doing things that are so much more dangerous now that I can't even imagine 10 or 15 years from now what we're going to see.
Well, look, it's almost, when your career's over and you see that it's coming to an end, a lot of people, you see it in boxing, you see it in MMA, you see guys that they're still fighting, and like, dude, you really shouldn't be taking any more hits to the head, you know? And, I was fortunate where I knew that I had done as good as I ever was going to do, and I was content. Right. I took 4th, 5th and 6th in the Olympia, and look, I was fortunate to do that because I knew guys before my time, before they had the 202 class and the 212 class, that were great bodybuilders and got no recognition, because they were being outclassed by guys that are 250, 260 pounds, and so I was fortunate for that. But, knowing the time to get out and, getting out, you think it sounds easy, but there's not, I don't want to call it depression, because I don't think I've ever really gone through depression, but it was difficult, to walk away when, I was used to competing in something, in some form of another my whole life. I was a gymnast at an early age, and then I wrestled for 7 years. I got into football. I played football for 11 years, and I went right into bodybuilding. So there was always that sense of competition that I had in me that made me who I was. And, I got married. I have 2 daughters now, and that was the changing point for me. Look, I have 2 daughters. I want to be a good father. I want to be a good husband, and I want to provide. I want to be around for them. So, I made my last year, and that was a rough year for me because I kind of really wasn't there anymore mentally,
right.
And I was ready to move on from the sport. But even after that, going to the gym and not having something to train for,
right.
I don't want to say like you feel like you lose your purpose, but look, I still train hard. I still train great. I still eat good year round. But not having that competition, you lose something in yourself. But, if you could transition that, and that's what I've done. I've transitioned now into the company that I just started, and that's my new competition to make it good and compete with other guys out there, and I approach it that way.
You got to always, recreate yourself. And I think that you were always good at that. You were always good at finding another way to recreate who you were and find something that's going to interest you enough that you're going to pour all your creative energy into that. And obviously you have this new I Prevail supplement line. How did that come about?
Okay, so I had worked for 2 other sports supplement companies. I was an athlete for probably a half a dozen of them, for the duration of my career. And then when my wife was pregnant with my first daughter, I was offered a job for a sales position. And at the time, I was like, you know what? I need health benefits. I need insurance. We all got to grow up sooner or later. You can't be a bodybuilder forever. And that was the year of my first Olympia. So I was like, you know what? Let me try this. And I was approached that way because I was doing an event and I was signing autographs and at a booth, and I always gave my pictures away. I never charged. I kind of felt weird about who the fuck wants to buy a picture of me? I'm just happy you want to take it. So I was happy to give those pictures away. But I guess the way I talked about the products to the customer, to the person coming to the booth, when one of the workers of a company approached me because he heard me talking to some of the people in line, and he said, "Would you be interested in a sales position? I've never really heard anybody explain these products the way you have." So, and I was just doing it because that's what I do, and it kind of came natural for me. So I got into the sales end of it, and I started seeing the industry not only as an athlete, because I still was competing at that time, but I started seeing it as a business opportunity. And I worked for this one company for a couple of years, and I transitioned to a second company, which I just left back in November. And I started learning. I started learning, what are they doing? What's this doing? What are they doing wrong? How can I make this better? And I was offered the past couple of years from a couple different investors that kind of liked what I did and believed in me. And, they really just offered me money, which I don't want to sound pompous, but I didn't need that. I needed somebody to help bring something to the business because I was still learning at that time.
Right.
But the time came where I really didn't want to be a part of the company I was with anymore. And I took the shot, took the chance, and started this one. But, I learned a lot of what not to do. And, I learned the industry from a retail point of view and an end consumer point of view. But I know formulations. The same way I learned how to use drugs when I was a bodybuilder, I learned how to use supplements the same way.
Right.
And I'm doing my own formulations, and I put them all together. And, and that's it also, just like you said about John Kemper owning a gym. Being an athlete owning a gym is different from somebody else owning a gym or promoting a bodybuilding show too. Because you've done it. You know what it's like. You know what it's like for the athlete. So now I know what it's like for the athlete. So I can apply what I know and give it to people in any arena that they want to compete in and just help them become a better version of them.
What's the website with the supplements, Jason?
The website is i-prevailsubs.com.
Okay.
And we're just making it into retail. I'm actually visiting accounts today and fulfilling orders and stuff, but it's only been a couple of days. I've already gotten reorders, but the products are doing good. Yeah, cool. The products are doing well.
Congratulations on that. Final question I want to ask you, when you turn pro, back in the day.
98.
If there had been a 202 or 212 class back then, when you were in the prime of your career at the best of the best, do you think you could have won the Olympia?
To be honest, it's funny. I have a conversation with a couple of my training partners about this, and I really think if they would have had that class 2-3 years earlier, I think I would have won it at least 1 or 2 times.
Yeah.
Because later on, like when I first made it, I kind of started, downsizing a little bit, and also you spend years trying to get bigger to be in the pro ranks. But this was the first time, that I didn't have to gain all this weight in the off season because I wasn't trying to get bigger.
Right.
So when I stopped doing that, my off seasons weren't as prominent as they used to be. So I didn't try to get overly sized in the off season to diet down. So yeah, I think if this was like 2005, 6, or 7, I would have had a good shot at winning it a couple times. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think you missed your peak years in that 212 class. I think you were in the later part of your career when you hit the 212 division.
Yeah, and look, I was still fortunate, like I said, to place 4th, 5th, and 6th.
Yeah.
I'm happy for that. But I agree with you. I think if it was a couple years earlier, I could have maybe shined a little more.
Yeah. Well, Jason, it was great catching up with you again, obviously. I hope everyone enjoyed all the crazy stories from the 90s, and congratulations and good luck with the supplement line.
Dave, thank you for having me. Congratulations on everything for you too, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
No, yeah, and if you want to create some kind of a coupon code maybe for the RXMuscle listeners, we can put it in the description below, and people can try out your supplements.
Yeah, actually, I'll create one. I could email it to you later. We'll
Absolutely.
do a RXMuscle 10. I'll give everybody 10% off the site.
Sounds good. Take it easy, Jason, and keep up with us. Keep in touch with us.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. And guys, that's going to take us to the end of another episode of Live With, brought to you by Species Nutrition. I'm Dave Palumbo. We'll see you next time.